Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sean and James. Thanks our keynote speakers and MCN for having me. Today I'm going to talk about ordinary conditions being lit up from extraordinary change. Before I get going, MCN has assigned this a hashtag, and we'll monitor what comes up on Twitter for some dialogue at the end. This is a short presentation, so I've set up a Dropbox with some supplemental information and some resources. In 20 minutes, this is a lot of ground to cover. I've also prepared a high contrast accessible version of the slides for anyone who wants to follow that way. And I have a memory stick here with me right now if you want the accessible high contrast PDF version. We are entering a period of transformation and disruption at a scale and pace like we've never experienced. The possible ways you and your institutions will navigate this period is really compelling. You already have tons of access to information about emerging technology, so this isn't a deep course in emerging technology. This is one perspective of many out there, and there's so many different perspectives. There's so many different ways to deliver projects, as Sean and James actually just showed. So today I'll first set the stage with a really fast-paced scan of some emerging capabilities, and then high-level ideas on leadership that I hope might be useful for you, then on to project tactics relevant to the two prior topics, and conclude with dialogue. Does that sound good? I don't have a Sasquatch, unfortunately, in the presentation. Just a little bit about me. I didn't introduce myself. I'm a consultant. I've worked in technology and art my whole life. For a decade, I did international initiatives at Apple, including being on the team that launched the first iPhone, the very first iPhone, and I maintained a studio art practice. I've worked in collecting and non-collecting cultural organizations, and I do social science research on institutional leadership. I recently became one of a handful of women to obtain the Professional Innovation and Technology Certificate at MIT. I'm a big advocate for women and diversity in tech. So thematically, this presentation comes from connecting those areas, and I hope it connects to your work. So our first topic, emerging technology. I'm tracking 10 or so technology advancements that are converging on a 3 to 5 year timeline. Obviously, there's more than that, and there's more as you go, extend that timeline 5 to 8 years out, for example. We'll all be forced to rapidly shift our response to the disruptions and potentials generated by these capabilities. 3 to 5 years is not a long time, especially when you consider that you guys just did an exhibition that's going to be up for 2 years, right? 2 or 3 years, so it's not a long time. A colleague I worked with this summer pointed out, when someone starts college today, 50% of the types of jobs that exist on day one won't exist by graduation. And that's partly a result of technology shifting our world. So some forecasts range up to $40 trillion worth of economic growth driven by these capabilities, depending on how you measure that or what you measure. The point being that's about 4 times what the internet era was, and that was just one capability. I'm starting off with numbers so you can see just how big this is going to be. It all adds up to a lot of excitement. So my key point from this, anticipate an extraordinary and unfamiliar amount of change. So a fast survey of some of the capabilities, starting with advancements that might feel distant to a museum professional's audience, but are really pretty fascinating nonetheless. I'm going to move through this really fast on purpose. The point to be made is to gear your thinking to what is possible when these capabilities start to intertwine. So I'll start small with nanotechnology. And that is being able to create and manipulate materials on a molecular level. It's an additive function. It can intertwine with biotech in interesting ways. Some of the applications come with some pretty negative environmental consequences. Also small are MEMS. Those are micro-electromechanical systems. They are devices visible by microscope and have applications in many industries. Combined with biotech, for example, to make tiny machines that might clean out your arteries. And as I'm relating this to museums or archives, how might an archive tell the story of machines that are visible by microscope? Energy storage is the ability to store energy for future use. There's a commercial market and an anticipated big market for household scale. How would your facilities pursue this as it becomes more feasible? Biotechnology incorporating 3D printing is really provocative. For example, printing and re-engineering replacement body parts for humans. There are plenty of regulations and really precarious ethical questions that come associated with that. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is a technology that's been around for many years, so it's funny to call it emerging. But we now have computing power to embed this in a lot of new areas. This gets a lot of hype and attention right now. I just picked up a copy of the tech review as I was flying in here, and it's on the cover, and there's a lot of articles about AI and bias, so it's actually got tons of attention right now. Wearable computing, this is an extraordinary time for innovation. Wearable advancements will change sports and healthcare. Actually, right down the road at CMU, they've developed a way for the skin on your hand or forearm to become a touchpad interface. So could that type of interface ever be live in your museum? Digital currencies, there are almost 1,000 in various phases. They estimate the value to be something above like the GDP of 100 individual countries. Regulations might slow this area down, but there's so much money sitting out there, maybe not. If this doesn't slow down, will you integrate digital value transfer in your financial systems? I was a business lead on a digital value transfer project, and I can tell you that they come with a tremendous amount of testing and rework, so anticipate resourcing if you ever did something like that. Again, I'm purposely moving quickly through this section simply to provide food for thought and get you curious about everything that's out there. Imaging, advances in imaging. How about seeing around corners or in the dark with a mobile phone? Computer vision applications that are available to the public to create and share that require no programming experience. There are designs for barcodes that are less than 1 millimeter in size and can be read by ordinary cameras from a great distance. 3D reconstruction of objects from a single shot photo. Reading through dense structures like entire books. Cameras that read through closed antique documents. Do you think you'll be competing with industry at all for subject matter experts in this area? And VR and AR, because there's such rich discussion in this conference and in previous years on VR and AR, I think this audience has a well-developed understanding of VR and AR. At 4, you can check out the Virtual Futures presentation in Conference Center B. And I'll just add that in the business sector, you're now seeing this in manufacturing, where workers can do their job remotely. So consider how this might change work. I'll talk about 3 capabilities a little further. 3D printing is in the rapid advancement and adoption phase. This means organizations are using it in their normal practice. Manufacturing is a big area. A new normal might be 3D printed cars and commuter drones. How might that change the urban landscape or how people visit your institutions? I know this sounds sci-fi, but it is actually we can actually anticipate it. The number of connected devices by 2022, some studies predict billions. They will be relentlessly signaling status. Objects now buy other objects. Objects now interpret other objects. In the retail space, face recognition serves up product suggestions and knows a lot about you and your history. Do you want this integrated with interactive displays for your gallery? How would you manage a vendor who captures your constituents' data? There's a presentation, I think, on Friday dealing with addressing hacking and security that could be cool to check out. Some malls have replaced human security guards with robots. As of late 2016, there was an 18 to 20-month financial payback for an organization that replaces a human worker with a robot. There's a customer service robot called Pepper for retail that tells a customer everything they need to know about a product and takes the customer to that product. How would you respond if there was ever a suggestion that something like that be adopted for your museum or gallery? Would your constituents have an appetite for a robot facilitating the telling of our human stories? So my key point, anticipate combinations of advancements creating new capabilities and also rendering some technology obsolete at a much quicker pace. So if you're of the mind that these advances aren't applicable to your role or your institution, I'd respond by asking if you don't think it's plausible, might you consider that it's possible? A little over a year ago, the electronics maker Foxconn eliminated 60,000 jobs in what I think was one town. That's important to all of us because it leads to political, cultural, and structural changes. I'm not here presenting a fearful vision of extreme job loss, but if you anticipate your institution evolving its model in any way over the next 5 to 8 years, say as a makerspace, a wellness or community center, a meditation room, an urban safe space, combine that with these technology potentials, and I'm curious what kind of new meaning and new experience might be constructed. So let's build from this and explore relevant orientations to leadership. I'll start with a premise first because I'm conscious of the different roles you hold in your institutions. The premise is that you can lead at any level, and it will be up to leaders at all levels to invent the future. To my mind, leadership is relational, and any outcomes are collaborative. The consequence of collaboration is always new and often unexpected results. Going further, the convergence of multiple emerging tech capabilities, the environmental crisis and shifts in demographics will transform us on an unfamiliar scale. Some of the changes I'm talking about might do real harm economically to a population segment, maybe even threaten physical safety. Small towns are going to feel impact differently than larger, more diverse urban centers. I have the privilege of splitting time between a really remote small town, Marfa, Texas, and larger metro areas, and I see firsthand how technology is really unequally distributed. So how might a person move into all of this? Strategy is how your organization interacts with the transactional environment. Scenarios are the impacts of shifts in the contextual environment on the transactional environment. For example, technology, ecology, demographics. So rather than tying your organization's future to a sequence of events, explore multiple views about possible futures. There are different ways to do scenario planning. You can look at what is normative, that is to craft what you think a future should look like. What is probable, that is to make predictions, or what is plausible. With the level of wild change coming, you might be successful interrogating plausible futures rather than probable futures. Scenario planning has become a real area of interest for me. I'm happy to talk more on this outside the session or keep the conversation going by email. One tremendous value in scenario exercises is they do bring a richer understanding of present conditions. To my previous note on leadership, are you creating the conditions for everyone to pursue innovation, and is there a common understanding of what innovation is? There's a lot of different definitions and interpretations of innovation. This is probably familiar to anyone who's working on museum innovation models or labs. So predicated on the assumption that innovation is important in your organization, I want to give you a bullet list of 10 areas where you can innovate that might be forgotten. This is also on the Dropbox if you want to retrieve it. As I'm listing these, try to think about this on a 3 to 5 year timeline in conjunction with some of these imminent technologies. So 4 key areas: what your museum offers, who you serve, your processes, and the type of presence you use to deliver what you offer. So bullet points: can you lead innovation in technology components or system architecture? Number 2, visitor-centric solutions and services. Can you innovate to include new visitors? Who is underserved? What about the visitor experience and visitor interactions? I'm up to point 5. Can you innovate in your funding or revenue space? your organization's form and function? Can you innovate in your points of presence, either digital or physical? Your institution brand, how you organize networks or how your organization collaborates. And again, your processes and procedures. So stay with me while I connect this innovation to mission. Joy Ito has written about the pitfalls of trying to map and plan in a world of complexity and change in a way that resonated with me. He advocates for mythology over mission, fortifying mission and vision in the midst of all these rapid changes will be the new normal. And by the way, I think that's really hard. There's a contradiction to this. On one hand, be totally committed to your mission. On the other, will the mission be obsolete by the time the vision is fully disseminated? This quote sounds really theoretical, but on a practical level, it comes down to culture. And I agree there's many different definitions of culture. But bring it back to your day-to-day processes, your meetings, your blog posts, your communication, where you're getting lunch, what kind of music you're playing in your offices, and perhaps how you run your activities and your projects. And that brings me to the last topic I'm going to share today. I saw a recent informal survey of program and project managers showing that 80% thought there would be significant impact to their work or how they work because of emerging tech. 5% thought only a slight impact. This is just a mildly amusing sort of comparative check with what your opinion might be. It becomes more stimulating when you tease out the point that the people thinking they will be impacted are the people influencing what we do with these possibilities. Continuing with people, if you're working with a vendor to deliver an emerging technology project, check out their background, what would happen if they go belly up halfway through a project. The question to ask is, what is the vendor's maturity level, or how long have they been out of market? If people are deliberating value that you're getting from the project, artfully interrogate that. Make sure it's clearly explained to you and that you can vet it and clearly explain it to your board. Considerations about training people. Subject matter experts will be in very short supply. Your people might need training and they might not. Often what we need is just improved processes. Remember, a lot of this stuff will be new to everyone. So balance shooting from the hip or winging it against expensive training. There are a few examples in this conference of really successful learn-as-you-go efforts. And anticipate controlling reworks. New information will appear and new people will get involved and they'll advocate for tech switcheroos or the architecture of the week and so forth, this way and that way. Another note on people and teams. What happens when the group responsible for delivering strategic projects is made up of people who only think creatively or only think analytically? For example, some specialists. Inside or outside the museum, that means a lot of communication is generated just to test ideas or get work done. And if you're documenting work and the discussions, which I'll speak about in a minute, you're increasing time and workload. Find people who come up with ideas and then can become their own ideas' worst enemy. Find inventive people who can think wide and deep. Some people may disagree with me, but I think you have to find people who do both. This will not be easy. Hang in there, and it's okay to bounce ideas off people. Bottom line, dichotomy is great. Moving from people to procedures, this slide shows 4 good principles if your institution is going to do multiple projects and any of them handle emerging technology. Keep in mind, think ahead, anticipate 3 to 5 short years from now, what will be the new normal and what will be the associated possibilities. If you're project planning now, see if you can sense future context. Scenario planning is a great tool for that. Real quick, I might go a little bit over, Dawn. What are the true benefits of the project? This is a great question for when we encounter the new and enticing. To my previous point, challenge the ideas and plot the risks that come with using inherently risky technology. What is your organization's comfort level with risk? There might be some political implications if a project is canceled or goes sideways. When unproven technology becomes a growing component of what we're working with, we can anticipate a few things. There'll be an increased number of projects on people's plates, an increased level of pressure to deliver completion as soon as possible. Stage gate might be an appropriate approach for large, low-risk projects. Agile, both the method and the attitude, might be more appropriate for managing unproven technology. Essentially, you're trying to find the shortest path from A to B. On your projects, that might be huddles or inventive approaches. As you know, in the testing, it's where innovation often occurs. I'd suggest to build buffer into your scheduling. There'll be lots of unknowns. You won't have historical data, so roll with it. If open source is available, use it. If consultants are needed and you can afford it, hire them. I think confidentiality will be overrated. And by the way, when you're discussing lean or agile, make sure there's a common understanding in your organization of what those terms really mean. They sound good, but does everybody really get it? I have been in situations where a leader is discussing lean, and I came to realize that they didn't really understand what that meant. It sounded great, but just make sure that you all understand that. You might have to play the role of educator in your organization, which is a good thing. When I worked on strategic projects at Apple, we did not do documentation. The idea was that the business moved so fast that by the time things were documented, it would be obsolete. We then realized that it was necessary. This type of work, and we did a big push to document, this type of work typically isn't critical until it's really critical. And someone has changed jobs and you need to retrieve a key piece of info. Maybe one or two people here can relate. My recommendation was when you go back to work, think about how to do documentation in a good way. There will be unknowns, turnover, capture maintenance and updates to your efforts. This is a great thing to have for your board or sponsor. And I know this slide is a bit of an eye chart. It's basically food for thought on areas for knowledge capture, and it's on the Dropbox. This is my second to last slide. If your institution applies rules so that an agile method is used for all digital projects and StageGate is used for capital projects, you're actually operating rigidly, right? So what you're doing is trading good decision-making for quick decision-making. You'll have to find a negotiation in how this is managed. And tying this back to emerging tech in the museum sector, from a structural perspective, be equally wary of the architecture of the weak, creating relentless reworks and policies or structures set in stone. For example, closed off annual cycles. People come up with ideas, not once a year, but all year. And from a political perspective, just anticipate conflicts or power struggles when changes reshuffle systems. Tension in an organization is not a bad thing. So I'll leave you with 5 key takeaway points. Anticipate extraordinary change impacting you. There's tons of information on emerging technology, and it's exciting to think about what will happen when functions converge and combine. Innovation and scenario planning is a complement to strategy. Stay curious and critical. You can lead from any level to create the conditions for really interesting or experimental things to happen, hopefully. So I hope you enjoyed diving into an optimistic and kind of sci-fi interpretation of what's ahead. Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah.
So KendRa, you talked to us about looking forward, lots of different things coming, and being purposeful in seeing how we're going to use these things in our missions in our museums. We also talked about, once we decide on those things, methods for managing those projects and multiple teams. The reality is, a board member is going to say, here's a pot of money that somebody just gave us to do this specific thing. Like, let's go do it, right? So I was intrigued about your saying, leading from within. Not necessarily, you may not be the leader in the hierarchy, but you might be, influential in your network.
Correct.
So do you have any thoughts on, it's great to think about this, but the reality is things often get thrown in our laps, and how we should try to get that kind of mindset up to the decision makers.
Yes. Actually, it kind of relates to what you and I were talking about offline, and that is network effects. So I think it's important to recognize your own agency within a system, and you can maybe play with what will happen if you push or pull in that system. I don't think there's an easy answer for it. I think that's something, I think you articulated something to be aware of, and that is, yes, there's going to be these kind of shiny object things coming. There might be a political or a financial interest in pursuing something like this. And that's maybe why I included the project piece, because if you're looking at all of these efforts in an organization in a portfolio, you are going to have to do those exercises where you see how those benefits influence each other. That I would say be comfortable with not being in control, which is a little bit of a contradiction to be comfortable with your own agency in the organization. And recognize that maybe a lot of these timelines are not going to be syncing up. Like, things are not going to be as neat as we think. So I guess a larger, maybe like more philosophical answer to that would be some of the writing that they're doing. Like, I'm really fond of Joy Ito at MIT, and that's why I put the quote up, is, yeah, how to confront all this type of disruption. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
I don't think there's a real answer.
I don't
Your
think.
thoughts?
Yeah, and this isn't prescriptive. I would be completely foolish if I was coming up here to prescribe anything for a future that we don't know and you all are inventing, so. Oh, I'm sorry. I heard a Dropbox link, and was there another question? Okay. Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much, and I just wanted to share, in case anybody was curious what my image was in the presentation, it's actually a modification I did of the very first 3D prints that were created by Emmanuel Sachs from a photograph I took of him with a patent. He created that with a team, so it's kind of cool. Thank you.